Do I look at you or the camera?
You can look at me. Doesn't matter. Yeah, thanks for agreeing to do this with me, Grandpa. So tell me who you are and where you come from.
My name is Richard G. Price. Originally, I came from Panaca, Nevada. When I was young, I thought the G stood for great. Only I think it stands for goodness gracious. I can't believe that kid is mine. Well, Panaca, Nevada was wonderful. I mean, it was an idyllic childhood. Growing up there was wonderful. A very small town, about 300 people when I lived there was all.
Okay.
And I can remember.
What year?
I was born in 1943.
Okay.
And we left Panaca in 1953 and moved to Henderson, Nevada. I had a lot of freedom. I had a horse, and my friends had horses. And a lot of times we'd get up and leave in the morning and we wouldn't make it home till evening. I can't do that anymore. You can't be that free and easy with your children. But it was a wonderful way to grow up. We rode out in the hills, up the hills, down the hills, all around. Such a small town that's set out in the sagebrush and cedar trees. We actually had natural sand dunes just to the east of town. We had the small sand dunes and the big sand dunes, and we played in those.
Take your horses out then?
Yeah, we did.
How old were you when you started doing that?
I don't know, because it's some of my earliest memories. They would catch the horse that I'd learned to ride on, lead him over to the fence. I'd crawl up on the fence and slide over onto his back. Now, if I got off from him, I had to find a fence or a tree or something to climb up on to get back on.
You weren't tall enough to get up on him?
No, I was little. But I would say 6, 7, 8 years old. We did that a lot until we moved. And it wasn't until about the last part of my life there that I was able to ride a saddle.
And so you were 10 years old when you left there?
Yes.
So it had to have been before you were 8, because you did it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just 2 years of it.
Yeah, we all did it. The Phillipses and the Wadsworths and me. There were a lot of kids had horses over there then. Well, there's a lot of things in my life that I haven't covered here that I can't cover because we don't have the time. But for instance, when I was 14 years old, my dad took me to work on a ranch up in the mountains east of Pioche, Nevada, 22 miles east of Pioche. And I worked for a man named Everest Hackett, and there were experiences that I've had that we just haven't got time to go into right now. Well, I'll tell you then, I didn't know anything about cattle. I've been riding horses all my life, but I didn't know anything about herding cattle. And so when we got there, Everest Hackett had some cows gathered in a round corral, and he saddled me a horse. And Everest said, why don't you push these cows along the fence? When you come to the end of the fence, I'll catch up to you, because I want to stay and talk to your dad. Well, we came to the end of the fence, and he didn't show up. He wasn't there. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. Then I panicked, and I just sat there and I looked at him, and half the cows moseyed off the same general direction. Half of them turned to the right. What do? I didn't know. Finally decided that the ones on the left were going the right direction. And I was riding this horse that could really run. It was a mare. Her name was Ginger. And I put the spurs to her and run up through the trees to get around them, to turn these cows back, to go back the other way. And a branch hit me and knocked me out of the saddle. Hit me right across the chest. We were on a dead run. And I was wearing a pair of boots that my Uncle Grant had bought and given to my dad. And my dad had worn them and given to my brother Darrell. And Darrell had worn them, and that's what I was wearing on this ranch. I was 14 years old. Well, they had a half sole that had come loose right here. So the sole was flapping down, and we had taken electrical tape and taped them so that I could wear them on the ranch. The tape broke. Well, that flap caught in the stirrup.
You get dragged.
And she was dragging me up through the trees, and she stepped on me twice on this leg and once on the left, and it jerked me free from the stirrup. I didn't even feel it because the adrenaline rush was so high. I jumped up and screamed her name, and she stopped and quivered all over. and got the reins and got back in the saddle. Those cows were long gone. And I just turned and went back to the other cows and just started pushing them up this hill. I thought, I'm going to get fired my first day on the job. When I turned around to come back, I met him and his wife. And they had come along behind me, saw where I had lost those cows. And they tracked them and went up through the trees and gathered them. And they were pushing all the cows that I had lost. And they pushed them towards me. And then I turned and we pushed them up to where I had left the other cows. And that was for the summer range, where the grass was good during the summer up in the mountains.
So they wanted them to go
They wanted them to go left.
where you thought that they should have gone.
Should have gone.
And the ones that were getting away, you did the right thing.
Only I should have gathered them. I should have known how to go up through the trees.
Not hit a tree. Right.
And so I wrote home and said to my mom and dad, I told them the whole story, and I said, but you know, everything's fine here. How's everything at home? Well, can you picture a mother getting a letter like that from a 14-year-old kid?
You didn't have the sense to not tell her.
No, she wanted dad to get in the car and come and get me right away.
Mm-hmm.
But he wouldn't do it. Well, I also worked for him 2 years later when I turned 16. And he sold his ranch that year and bought a ranch and a farm in Idaho. And I went up and worked up in Idaho the rest of the summer. My brother Darrell was on a mission at that time, and he was in Butte, Montana. And we had 2 weeks that we didn't have anything to do. We had gotten all the hay in, and now what they had to do was wait for the hay to get ready to cut again before we baled it, before we started hauling hay again. Had about a section, about 640 acres for hay and wheat, and we put up a lot of hay. Well, I hopped on a bus and went to Butte, Montana to see my brother Darrell on his mission. I didn't know that was against the rules, and I didn't call and ask my folks or anything else. I just did it. And then I traveled around with him for 2 weeks, and he was a supervising elder, they called it back then, which they would probably call assistant to the president now.
Uh-huh.
And so we went to, I can't think of the little town, but from there we went to White Sulphur Springs and back around to Billings and then over to Butte. And then I spent about a week in Butte, hopped the bus and went back to Idaho to American Falls and spent the rest of the summer doing that. But it was fun. There was another elder there about my size. I wore his suit. It was just like I was on a mission. There I was breaking the rules. I wonder if it ever made him nervous, wondering if the president was going to catch him.
Did you ever ask him?
Anyway, there's a life of little experiences like that that have been pleasant to look back on, and I enjoyed them. But I was passionate about horses. When I was a kid, I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. I knew that I wanted to be a good man, that I would always do the right thing, that I would never lie, never steal, never cheat, and that I would never hurt anyone because I would always do the right thing, and that I would be a cowboy. Well, I got a lump here in my neck, and the doctor was talking about maybe cancer, so I began to think I was going to die. I had 2 regrets. One, I did not grow up to be the man that as a boy I thought I would. I didn't always do the right thing. Sometimes I did lie. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes I hurt people because I didn't do the right thing. And I never got to be a real cowboy. So those were my 2 regrets. So I was passionate about that and passionate about the roping. I did some calf roping and team roping. And they're different. And actually you throw a different loop. One of them you're tied hard and fast to the horn, and the other you're not. And you have to do dallies, which is 2 wraps around the horn.
Mm-hmm.
So it's some of my earliest memories. Had to deal with the horses and the horseback riding. And we were poor. We were really poor then, and I didn't know it because everybody in the town was poor. But I remember that we had one cold water tap coming into the house. In order to bathe, they'd bring in a galvanized wash tub, fill it full of water. Well, they would heat water on the wood burning stove and pour into the galvanized wash tub. And then Mom would bathe 2 kids to the tub. Then they'd throw it out and put in fresh water. We bathed on Saturday night prior to going to church. We didn't have an indoor toilet or indoor plumbing. All we had was the one cold water tap. And so we had an outhouse that we had to go to summer and winter. And if you had to use the bathroom in the middle of the winter, it was quite a ways out there and quite cold. Panaca was cold in the early days. A lot of the guys, my dad included, worked in the mines up by Pioche, Nevada, Pioche Castleton mines. Dad told me later that he never got a car paid for. They would just get going and doing well and getting everything caught up, and he'd get laid off from the mines. So he would either lose the car or have to sell it back to the dealer. He'd have to do something. They mined lead, zinc, tungsten. I don't know, maybe there was a little bit of silver ore. I don't recall much gold being mined, but there could have been. You know, it was good. It was fun living there, and I can remember I cried like a baby when we left.
Yeah.
You know, it was traumatic for me, but Dad had worked in the mines, and he worked straight graveyard, which is midnight till 8, approximately like that. And he was a timberman on contract, and so they got paid by, they would have a blast in the mine, and Dad and the rest of the guys that worked on his crew would go in and shore up the ceiling and everything so that it wouldn't collapse
Really?
onto the miners. In order to do that in a timely manner, they would have to go in fairly soon after the blast. Well, the smoke from dynamite going off affects some people with ferocious headaches, like migraine type headaches. And Dad would come home from the mines every night sick. Well, he did that, worked straight graveyard, was a timberman. He did all of those things, and in that year, he made the most money he had ever made in 1 year. He made $3,500. That was a year's wages. Anyway, he was sick every night. He would come home and vomit. He was just sick, and so his brother had become a barber and talked him into going to barber school. And so Dad hit a hot lick on a private mining concern, and he took some of the money and went to barber school. And when he got out of barber school is when we moved to Henderson. And Dad's first barbering job was on Nellis Air Force Base in what they called the NCO Club, the Non-Commissioned Officers Club. And he worked for his brother and his nephew, his brother's son. Eventually, and not too long after we moved there, Dad got a job in Henderson where we lived, and he bought the barber shop eventually where we lived.
You were telling me that your dad was kicked in the head as a kid.
My dad grew up on a ranch owned by an association, a ranching association. And my granddad ran his cattle with the associations. And so he grew up out there, and we only thought we were poor. On that ranch, for instance, I don't know if they had running water into the house. They didn't have a vehicle, they didn't have a car. And Dad went in to milk a cow, and the bucket rattled, and there was a horse that was bad to kick. And when the bucket rattled, that horse kicked and kicked Dad in the head about right here, back here. Yeah, about there. And it rolled him over into a little depression that they had made in order to help him scoop manure out of the stalls and out of the barn. Made it really easy. It was an ingenious type of thing, but that horse continued to kick, and he kicked right over Grandpa's head, my dad's head, tore down a wall that they had to rebuild. The only thing saved Dad was that little depression that he fell into. Well, he was unconscious for about 7 days and finally came to. But from then on, Dad told me that he had a headache every day of his life. He eventually died from a bleeding blood vessel in the brain. So I don't know if those two were connected or not. So it was it was a hard life. Dad told me he distinctly remembers the first car they ever got He was still living at home working on the ranch for his dad. And it didn't have any windows, roll-up windows or anything.
His father was a rancher?
Yeah, he ran the Cattle Association ranch for them. And Dad told me the first one that they got that had windows, it had curtains, and the curtain would pull down and hook on the door. And when it got going down the road, it had probably had a top speed of about 35 miles an hour. But those curtains would billow out. Dad said when the car was coming down the road at you, it looked like the ears of an elephant when those curtains would billow out.
Did you grow up knowing your grandfather?
Yes. I knew my dad's dad and his mother, my grandmother and grandfather Price. And I knew my mom's dad and mother too, the Chadburns. Well, my grandfather Truman, okay, so it was my great-grandfather Truman came over from England, and my great-grandmother's maiden name was Bowler. She married the Truman. And so then my mother's maiden name would be Truman, but that's how it came. And they made a good living. I don't know exactly what they did, but I do know that he got dementia of a form that they weren't familiar with, and they thought that he had gone insane, and so they committed him to a mental institution for the insane, and that's where he died.
And your mother had Alzheimer's.
Her mother had dementia, and they thought that it was caused by sugar diabetes because she had diabetes, and that can happen. However, I truly believe that my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and my mother had it.
Mm-hmm.
My mother had two brothers that had it as well, and I think it came down through the Truman line.
You think it was genetic, not from exposure?
No, I think it was genetic. My mother's cancer, I think, was from exposure from the open air testing on the Nevada test site. The winds that blew. Mm-hmm. I believe that she was definitely a downwinder.
Do you know how your parents met?
All I can remember is Mom told me one of the first times she'd ever seen my dad, that he was wading down a ditch carrying his boots, singing a song. Now, I don't know the story behind that, Tanner. It just struck me as funny. And I will tell you this, in all honesty, memories are not infallible.
Right, they
And
tricked
so
you.
I could have this completely wrong, but that's what strikes in my mind. And my dad was really a good cowboy, and he struck an imposing figure on a horse. He was not only a good cowman, he was a good horseman, and he loved to rope, and he did a little rodeoing. And anyway, that's kind of the memory that I had. And I know when they used to have dances, anybody that could go would go. You know, if you were healthy and there wasn't anything wrong, you hadn't given other obligations, and there was a dance, people went to dance. They loved it. They liked it. Both square dancing and like ballroom dancing. You know, people danced. They took advantage of it. And I know that she went to some dances with Dad. I don't know the whole story. I don't know, around 10.
10 of them.
I think so. But there were 2 or 3 of them that died very young, in infancy. It was a hard life. I asked Dad why they didn't take him to a doctor, to a hospital when he got kicked in the head, and he said it probably would have taken him several days just to get to a doctor from where the ranch house was. By the time they got there, he would either live or he would die, and so that's kind of the way things were. Maybe if it would have gone on, they would have loaded up and taken him to Cedar City, closest doctor. But he came out of it, and they didn't, so they didn't have to. Now, it didn't leave him mentally incapacitated in any way. My dad was a smart man, but he was also a wise man. And he had beautiful penmanship, much better than mine.
What do you mean by a smart man and also a wise man?
Well, and maybe that's what made him so smart, was that he was so wise. He was very slow to overreact. He looked at things carefully, and usually when he was a very quiet man, and so he was very observant. When he opened his mouth, it was usually something worth listening to. And it took me a long time to learn to follow his advice, because I was a rebellious child.
How so?
I don't know, I guess every family needs one, and I just happened to be the one that came along. The rest of them were almost perfect.
Really?
Yeah, they were all good, really good kids. Well, I was born into a wonderful family. My mom and dad, my word, Tanner, they are such wonderful people, you can't even begin to believe it. And so are my siblings. And here's the crazy thing about my siblings. They're very protective of me. It's almost like they recognize that I am a weak spirit, a weak soul, and I need some protection, you know? They're very protective. Susan has mentioned it several times. Your siblings are so protective of you. So they were different. Each one of them was different. Each one had different qualities. Gary, once again, Gary was the jock. Gary could have been a boxer. He could have been a track star. He ran track in high school. He was really good. He was a 4-year letterman in high school, lettered as a freshman. He was extremely athletic in everything that he did. And there was a guy there that taught him how to box in Panaca, and Gary's hands were so fast that he could hit you, and you wouldn't be sure which hand he hit you with. But he also had a tremendous sense of family responsibility. Whenever the folks went anywhere, they put him in charge. He grew up with that sense of responsibility, and he still has it to this day. He still feels responsible for the family. So, my oldest brother, Gary, eventually became a bishop, and he was a member of the Stake High Council, things of this nature,
Mm-hmm.
And Daryl was the missionary, and he also was the one who probably had the best knowledge of the gospel, all around knowledge of the gospel. And he has the very best knowledge of the New Testament. He went on the mission. He was a good-looking young man, slender built, good mechanic. And he continued to do missionary work. To this day, he's been involved in it in one way or another, even as a ward missionary, or as a what is the word? The ward mission president, or the stake missionary leader. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's still doing it to this day. Does a lot of missionary work. Daryl's amazing too, and he's always been a good friend. Now, brothers sometimes aren't good friends to each other, but Daryl and I worked together. We played together. We rode horses together. We were closer. Judy, with that intelligence of hers, and the knowledge of the gospel, very strong. Uncle Roland was a bishop. He was in state presidencies. He was just served all of their life. Mary had this wonderful gift to look at people, and she had instincts about people, about what made them tick, about why they were the way they were. She was amazing. She was amazing. Now, who do you think was the dumbest one of the whole bunch? It was me, And the rest of the family recognized my shortcomings and have been protective of me. So I cannot say one bad thing about my siblings. No, not one. They've been so good to me. And you can talk to Susan about it. I'm sure that she will agree to the fact that how protective they are of me. I had a good bishop, actually a series of good bishops. And even though I married young, I married a really good woman. And she had a tremendous impact on my life for good.
How did she come to enjoy the company of a rebellious degenerate. No, I'm just kidding. I can't. I'm gonna cut that out. I won't
No,
leave
I don't
that
mind
there.
you saying that.
I know you'd say
so
some kind of joke
you
like
know,
that,
I
but I
was-
shouldn't
I
have
was-
made it.
I was rebellious and maybe a little bit degenerate. But her dad was a real rough customer,
Mm.
and I was scared to death of him. And
What was his name?
his name was R.L.
Mm.
That's who R.L. Price is named after.
Okay.
And I tell you this, he was so tough. He never had to shave. He'd take a hammer and pound his whiskers in and bite them off from the inside. You know, really,
That's-
he was tough. He's one of the few people that I ever saw that could do one-handed push-ups.
Mm.
He would do one-handed push-ups, many of them in a row. And he was kind of a rounder. He was a hard-drinking, hard-fighting guy. You
And
know,
so
that was her dad.
her family were all members of the church, but he was.
He never went. His upbringing, his childhood was very, very difficult. When he was 8 years old, his dad took him out to the sheep herd, and he was responsible for keeping the sheep together, for cooking his own meals, and taking care of himself at 8 years of age. If that happened today, they would have put his dad in jail for child abuse,
Right.
child neglect. So when he came to town, things were different for him than they would have been for you or for me. And as it was, he turned out to be, a very good man. He was a talented man work-wise. He could weld, he could do pipe fitting, plumbing, electrical. He could do just about anything. And he was a fearless cowboy type of guy.
Both of your fathers were into horses.
My dad was a better horseman. No, R.L. may have been better with riding rough stock, the bucking horses.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that. But I suspect maybe he was.
He was pretty tough.
He was really tough.
Mm.
So she grew up around that. So I might have seemed kind of mild to her, I'm not sure.
Right.
But we got married so young, and there were people did us both a big favor. They said, "Well, you kids, you're foolish, and this will never last. You'll never make it." And it made both of us determined to make it through the tough times. And every marriage has them. And every marriage has their ups and downs. And
How old were you?
I was 17, and she was 16 when we got married.
Were you still in high school?
She dropped out. I continued, but I finished my senior year and graduated. So, we had those ups and downs, and I did some things that I have truly had to repent for, that I have been very sorry for. And I'm not talking about like a moral sin type of thing. I'm talking about the way that I treated her when I was young.
Mm.
I wasn't always exactly nice, and I had a lot to learn about being a good person, about treating my wife with respect and the way that she should be treated. So I had a lot to learn about that. I think that it was kind of a slow go until I would say my mid-20s.
Seems
So
pretty quick learner.
Well, from 17 to say 27,
I have a lot of friends that their marriages don't last, and it seems that a young man doesn't appreciate what he has.
that's so true. And so many young people think that their wife has to be perfect.
Mm.
They don't have to be perfect, but their wives do. If the wives get a little heavy, that writes her off, and then she's no longer perfect, so I can't love her.
Mm.
But that's not true, and that's not what counts. And so those are the types of things I'm talking about. And she had seen a lot of the other side of life, the rougher side of life, caused by drinking and things with her dad. And so she did not want that to be her life. She wanted a gentler lifestyle, I think, and you know, I guess a husband that honored his priesthood, and those things were very important to her.
You were married in a temple.
Not in the beginning, no.
When did?
Okay, I think that it was long about we got married in 61, and I think that it was about 64 or 65 that we were sealed in the St. George Temple. And we were having some good years in there. I had already gone through some of the rough stuff, a little bit of drinking and things of that nature, and worked on the highway department. Some of my friends drank, and they were good people, but they had a different lifestyle than what she wanted to build for herself. So anyway, after we were married in the temple, we got to where we were going to the temple about once a month, and we had to drive to St. George to do it. And we had to jockey our work times with the temple times in order to be able to go.
Would you mind if we backed up? How did you meet? I remember a yellow dress.
Yeah, when we met, sack dresses were the rage. I know now. You'd have to find a picture of a sack dress. I don't know, but I was late for seminary, and I came in, and there was a table by the door, and I set my library book on that table, and I went over and sat down on a little couch that they had in the lobby of the chapel there, the Ocean Street Chapel in Henderson.
Okay.
And she was later than I was, and she came in and went over to that table and picked up my library book, and she said, Richard Price, wonder what he'd do if his library book came up missing. And I got up, walked over, and took it out of her hand and slugged her on the shoulder. I said, probably that. That's how we met.
What a terrible, terrible story.
Well,
that's hilarious.
Well, you should never mess with my library book.
You like books. Did you always? So what was the library book? Do you remember what the book was?
Heavens no. But I started asking her out.
How did she say yes? Did you talk to her later? Say, hey, I just wanted to say I'd like the chance to.
She said she thought I was the biggest jerk
I
in the world, but I tell everybody she was crazy about me because of that, suspicious, or however you say it, that strange beginning that we had. We ended up married. We were married before she died for 47 and a half years. And well, after she died, I went through severe guilt for the way that I treated her in some of the early years. I had the idea that I was better than her in the beginning, and that she was lucky to be married to me. And after a few years, it dawned on me that she was maybe better than me, and I was lucky to be married to her. I think she didn't realize that she was smart because she was not educated, and she equated education with intelligence. And so she didn't realize how smart she was. And in truth, she was incredibly intelligent, and she was very talented, and she was very artistic. One of the things that I felt guilty about was robbing her of those years of discovery on what she could do. And I felt like that she could have become anything that she put her mind to, and that I took that away from her. After she died, I had a lot of reconciling to do. So, and I love her to this day, and she became a very independent woman. She was extremely capable of making her own decisions, and that's one of the things that I loved about her. And when I married Susan, it was evident to me that Susan also had that ability, the ability and the desire to make her own decisions and not to be bound by my opinions before she made a decision. She is perfectly capable of making her own decisions. And also Susan is like Helen in that Susan is very intelligent. Unlike Helen, Susan is also very well educated, and she graduated from college the same year that her youngest daughter did. They went to the same college. But Helen and I had a good life. She was, I think she was a very pretty girl, a very pretty woman. I thought she was outstanding when we were young. And one of the things that I felt guilty about was the way that I treated her in her early years. I would like to have gone back and made that different for her. But in all honesty, I'll tell you this, Tanner. When we found out that she had cancer, I had no idea. They told her that she had adenocarcinoma. We didn't know what it was. We didn't know how bad it was. And so I went on the computer. And adenocarcinoma in a woman usually refers to ovarian cancer. And the majority of them die within 5 years. But she was diagnosed on the 27th of June, which will be tomorrow.
The day after?
Of the cancer. And I looked it up and saw the odds. I knew that she didn't have a lot of time left. And so I decided that I would do everything in my power to make her last years on earth good years. Everything I could to make her happy. And she lived 5 years to the day that she was diagnosed. She died the 27th day of June in 2008. So, and her birthday, she had the coolest birthday, Tanner. She was born in February, which is the second month. She was born the third day, and she was born in 1945. Her birthday was 2345. You know, never forgot it. I had this dream, that this is a true story. I've always said to the grandkids, you think you'll ever be as good looking as I am? I've known that I never was really good looking at all. But I had this dream, and in this dream, I was in a car and I was running low on gas, and we were in a traffic jam on the freeway. Mm-hmm. And I looked, and there was a dirt road that ran off the freeway and ran down a little ways, and there was a service station. And there were cars lined up getting gas. So I thought I'd better get over there, and I whipped off the freeway and drove down there on that dirt road and got in line and get gas. Well, as I was watching, every time somebody filled up with gas, the owner gave them something. And when I got up, I could see that it was a gold token. And come to find out, they had a chicken that laid golden eggs. And it wasn't just one egg at a time. They had a little blanket over the back of this chicken, and it was turning them out at a dozen eggs at a time. And then they had a little slicer, like an egg slicer, like for hard-boiled eggs. And they would slice those eggs into equal parts, and they would give somebody part of the golden egg when they gassed up. Now, the grandfather was really a handsome man, and he ran the station with the help of his grandson. And the grandson was homely. He was really homely. And I'm sitting there looking at the grandson, and the grandfather came over to me like he could read my mind, and he said, I know what you're thinking, but if you think he's ugly now, you should have seen him when he was younger. I despaired for him. And just then the grandson ran up, and he had this huge smile on his face, and he said to his grandfather, Grandfather, do you think that I will ever be as good looking as you are? And the grandfather said this, I've already told you, kid. It doesn't matter how good looking you are. What matters is how you treat people. That's what counts. So from this dream, I extrapolated two things that I learned. One, if you have more than your need, share the wealth, share the gold. And two, it really doesn't matter what you look like. It's how you treat other people. That's what counts. Now, I told this dream to a state patriarch, and he said, You know, that's funny, and I get where you're coming from on the two things that you learned from the dream. But he said, Richard, the thought that I had was the handsome grandfather was our Father in heaven, and the ugly grandchild was us. And the ugly grandchild got better looking as he got older, and that's because he increased his knowledge in the gospel and his faith in our Father in heaven. So as he progressed, he became more delightful, delightsome, better looking, brighter countenance.
Mm-hmm.
So I really believe in dreams. So if you remember a dream word for word, if it stays with you like that, there's a lesson in there for you. A lot of people would say that's inspiration from our Father in heaven. If you believe it, that's okay. I do believe it. But if you don't believe it, there's still a lesson there. Your subconscious is trying to tell you something. Well, yeah, I'll tell you one more story. I was roping calves, and I could catch them. I wasn't that bad. I wasn't quick getting off. I wasn't as agile as like Richie. So when you rope a calf, you have got to get up and go down the rope. You've got to throw the calf down and tie 3 of its legs together before the time's up. And we had a horse that belonged to Del Stewart, and he was a blue roan kind of horse. And we called him Old Blue, even though he wasn't old, he was young horse. And it was a cool morning. It was an unusual early June morning and cool. In Henderson, the nights don't cool off that much, but this was a cool morning. And there, down at the Krells, there were some people that had homesteaded a little area, squatters, and they had dug their own well. And they had a bunch of little kids, and they had a milk cow. Well, their milk cow got out. And when I saddled up Old Blue to go for that ride that morning, I saw that cow was out, and I opened the gate to the arena and drove the cow in and closed the gate. As I start down through the country, I look over my shoulder and I see them little kids looking for their cow. So I turned around to tell them, and I turned around and kind of put the spurs to Old Blue, and he bobbed his head and went to bucking. And when he did, I jerk his head up like this. There's a throat latch that goes from one side of a bridle bit to the other. And that puts pressure, so that when you pull it back, it puts pressure here, and then the bit,
Put his head down.
Well, you can get the head up too by doing it. Only thing is, it was leather and it had rotted and broke. When it did, my hand went up like this, so my balance was gone, and he bucked me off backwards off over his butt. When he did, he kicked me in the ribs. I had 4 horseshoe prints on me. I got kicked twice with both feet. And in fact, just off my backbone, I had a perfect horseshoe where you could even see the nail prints. I mean, they were really tough to take. So he kicked me up in the air, and before I hit the ground, he kicked me again. And when I come down, I lit, and the ground was soft, and a big pile of dirt went up. Tanner, I couldn't get my breath. I thought I was going to die. I thought, I couldn't breathe. So and here's these little kids, and they're coming at me, and I'm thinking, I need help. I want you to help me. And I put my arms like this to try and get air in, like when you get the wind knocked out of you. And I come out of that dust cloud with my arms up like this, trying to say help. Here's what come out. Those little kids, their eyes bugged out about that far. And I tried to get help out one more time. That's all that came out again. And finally, I got a little breath. I got a little, and then I got another one. And finally, I could breathe. And Old Blue had kind of run off and stopped, and one of them kids went over, got him by the reins, and brought him back over to me. And we walked back over to the corral because it wasn't very far from the corral. And I said, "You looking for your cow?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "It's right there. But let me give you some money. I need you to call my dad because I need some help. I'm hurt." And I made them memorize one of them memorized half of the number, and the other one the other half. So they walked up to the payphone to call Dad. There was a payphone up at the top of the arena. About the time they got there, Dad came around the corner, came down to the trails. So we unsaddled him, and Dad took me to the emergency room, check out, see if I had any broken ribs or anything wrong, you know. But makes a good story. Now, the X-ray technician said, I don't know why you'd think he'd have any broken ribs. He's got so much fat on them ribs. There's no way he could break one.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. It's messed up.
Well, I had gone to high school with her.
Oh, wow.
I knew her.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so you were a bit older. That you were.
I was married, yeah.
Oh.
We had Audrey, Rich, and Jim, and didn't know it, but Helen was pregnant with Bert at the time, and I couldn't work.
You mean Christina? Or
Let's
you
see.
had all four because she's before Bert.
Audrey, Rich, Jim, Christina, yeah. It was Bert. It was Bert that was, she was pregnant with Bert.
Mm-hmm.
And so we drove up to Wyoming, took a vacation, because I couldn't even raise my hands hardly, you know. And I had a lot of trouble getting up and down and getting around. It took me a while to heal up. And I would like to talk a little bit about the kids. I was so young that I knew nothing about being a parent. When Audrey was born, I was 18. And for probably the first time in my life, I loved somebody more than myself. And of course, Richie came along 1 year later. Audrey was born on the 19th of December, and Rich was born on the 15th of December. Audrey was born in 61, Rich in 62. So, that's just to give you an idea. I was very young, so I was 18 when Audrey was born, 19 with Rich. I think Jim was 2 years later, so it would have been 21. By the time I was 21, I had 3 children. And then, so there was Audrey, Rich, Jim, Christina, Bert, and then Russell. And what I thought in the beginning that the most important thing in the world was to have well-behaved children. And I was wrong. And it was not until things were too hard on some of the kids and they kind of rebelled against that kind of discipline that I discovered that the most important thing that we can teach our children is that we love them. We think that they're born knowing that we love them, but they're not. We have to teach them that. And so we have to teach them, that's part of nourishment. Not nourishment, nurturing. That's part of nurturing, the nurturing process. And anyway, I really enjoyed the kids, especially when they were young. It wasn't until they got to be teenagers and they were all tougher than me that life took on a little different color. But I don't want you to think that it was one big fist fight after another, because it wasn't. But it was a learning experience. Sometimes they started looking from love in all the wrong places. Maybe sometimes from their friends, parents, things of this nature, you know, that I realized that, hey, you know what, these kids don't know that I love them. It's kind of a heartbreak, but it wasn't too late to undo some of that damage. You know, they were still at home. And that was a very important lesson for me. And I have told that to other people with small children, hoping that they would learn that lesson from my mistakes and not from their own. Long story short, in the beginning, I was too rough. I was too strict. This pendulum is over here now, strict, where my hand is. As the pendulum swung the other way, I began to mellow. So what happened was, the older 2 kids especially had it pretty tough, you know. They didn't know that I loved them. As the pendulum swung, Jim come along, and he got a little more of a milder upbringing. I know that's poor English, but he had a little milder upbringing. Still maybe a little too strict. Christina, maybe not so bad. And then Bert, of course, was spoiled rotten. I'm
sure he'll love to hear that.
And then Russell Russell was more spoiled than Bert.
No, really.
So, Audrey was a lot like her dad in a lot of ways. You know, she had a little bit of a rebellious nature and a rebellious streak. But Audrey was an extremely hard worker and never had trouble holding a job. And she had friends that friends she was loyal to. But through it all, whether I agreed with Audrey, agreed with the way she lived, whether I agreed with her or not, we still somehow managed to have a relationship that was good, that was worthwhile. Well, for instance, one time Audrey and I took a trip and went down to Arizona. I don't know where Helen was, but there was Audrey and Matthew and me and Russell. And we went down to Arizona to look at a ranch. I was all wanting to be a cowboy back then, and we had a wonderful time doing that. You know, things like that. And then, of course, when she got sick, we took care of her. She died at our house. And I had promised her that she made me promise not to let her die in a hospital. And so we took care of her at the house, which wasn't always easy, you know, but we did it. We kept our word to her. I feel good about that. So we enjoyed doing things with each other. And it was a real heartbreak when she died young, the age of 32. What happens, even though we went through everything with her, watched her suffer and was in terrible pain, and watched the agony and the fear and the crying and everything. And I told someone, when Audrey dies, I've already grieved for her. I won't shed a tear. I had no idea what a ridiculous statement that was. Because when you lose a child, it leaves a hole in you that just doesn't want to heal up. And it's there for a long, long time. And I found myself going through some depression. I would have grief attacks come out of nowhere that I had trouble understanding. And I think that's fairly common for people who lose children. Lose them in that way, you know. Richie was, he was a real jock. He was a little rebellious too. He was kind of a stud. He really enjoyed sports, very good at sports. And he had an accident when he was playing football, and he actually had a neck injury and had a cracked vertebrae in his neck, and I think it was the fifth cervical vertebrae, and could have been life-threatening. Could have made him paralyzed him. Could have done a lot of different things to him. So he was unlucky that he got the injury, and he was lucky that it didn't affect him worse. He was also good in other sports. He took it very seriously. When he decided to become a cowboy, and he went into roping and things of this nature, he studied it. I mean, he really studied it. And he studied training horses, and he became a really good hand with a colt, bringing a colt along, making a rope horse out of him, and he became a good roper, better than I've ever been. I mean, he's really good.
It sounds interesting because it sounds like Rich had an interesting kind of meld between Helen's ability to study, which I felt like I got to see because I saw how talented she was at things that nobody ever taught her.
Yeah.
And when did he decide to start studying and pursuing roping and horses? Was that
He was married. He was married to Dawn when he got into horses, and I think that both Richie and Nikki were born at that time. And I think he said he wanted to spend more time with me, but I got out of horses shortly after he got into it. In fact, he bought my last horse from me. Well, before I moved up here. And I'm thinking that Richie got into horses before Audrey died because we were living on Burton Street at the time. And we moved up to Apostle, to the house that you remember. And that's where we were living when Audrey died. He still studies and practices everything that he studies. watches videos of this type of thing. And he's also, became very familiar with codes, city codes, building codes, welding codes, all of those type of things, and it helped him with the school district. And he made more money than I ever thought about making because he went up the ladder so high in the school district. Jim was always a good student, and he was also a little easier to get along with it, as far as the teachers are concerned, because he was a good student. He was good in class. He wasn't one of these guys that causes disruptions and things of this nature. And he studied. He's always had good grades, and he's always been dependable. Just stick to it. And I think that's why he's done well. One of the reasons he's done well with M&M Mars is that he's one of those guys that sticks to it, learns everything he can about it, tries to improve on it. And also, I believe that he was blessed because he went on a mission. Even though he hasn't stayed with the church, he went on a mission. He learned to read, write, and speak Spanish fluently. And when M&M Mars found out about it, he was working for Ethel M, which was created for Forrest Mars's pleasure after he retired from M&M and turned it over to his boys to run the company. And that's where Jim worked. And they found out that he could read and write Spanish, speak Spanish. They borrowed him from the Ethel M Corporation and sent him down to, I think, Rio de Janeiro, anyway, South America, where he did some audits on some concerns that they owned down there. And then he would make a report in English for the parent company and make the same report in Spanish for the company in South America. To this day, he still worked for M&M Mars Corporation, and he's doing very well with them. And he currently, of course, as you know, lives in Chicago now, the Chicago area. Yeah, he loved to sing, and all of the kids liked to sing for some reason. Jim was very passionate about it. His music teacher just loved him, and she hated me.
Because you couldn't sing, or why?
No.
Why?
I think because I was still in my kind of ornery phase,
Oh,
and
you triggered her.
I
Set her off.
yeah, probably. And what I discovered also in life is that nobody likes everybody, and everybody isn't going to like everybody else. So just because somebody doesn't like you doesn't mean that you're arrogant or an ass. It just means that they don't like you. Certain personalities are attracted to other personalities. I quit worrying about it. If they like me, fine. If they don't like me, I'll try to avoid them. And that's fine too. It's up to them. So then there was Christina, and Christina was she was a beautiful child, and she was very good. She was a very good person. And one time I gave a talk in church, and I said that Christina thinks that we should thank our lucky stars that she's our daughter because she's such a good kid.
You said that?
In church. She was embarrassed. But
I'm sure.
you'll have to ask her about thanking our lucky stars that she's our child. But one thing about your mother, I didn't know that she could sing. And I'm working 2 jobs at that point. And so Helen was raising the kids by herself. I'm working. I would get off work in the barbershop and go to another job. And that's when I was working for the school district, Tanner. So anyway, they had a road show. And back in those days, they were still doing competitions. And they would take that road show from one chapel to another chapel to another chapel, and within the stake boundaries. Well, they wrote the lead runner. She was just the first year in Mutual. She was 12 years old,
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so Helen said to me, "Aren't you going to come and go to the road show?" It was on a Saturday night. I said, "I'm tired." She said, "Well, Christina's in it, and you need to come." I went. I was blown away. There was this little kid up on the stage. I was at the back of the auditorium, the gym area, and she was projecting that far back. I could hear her without a microphone. And she could sing. I mean, she could flat sing. Just shocked me. Shouldn't have, because Audrey, Rich, and Jim were all, they were good singers. And so was Bert. Bert was very good. So somewhere, I blessed them with a love of music. Helen blessed them with the ability to sing. No, that's true. So, because when I was in the branch presidency, when Justin came and heard that talk about my dream, the branch president and I used to see who could sing the loudest. And he could sing the loudest, but I could sing the worst. So, I was surprised too about how good she was with the corporate world. She actually went to work for the school district, and she was kind of the go-between the BLM and the school district. That's how she got acquainted in the BLM. And she did a bunch of studying before she ever went in for the interview for the school district. They were surprised at the knowledge that she had about the position that they wanted her to take, because she had researched it. So she had that. I didn't teach her that. Who taught her that? It wasn't me. Maybe she taught herself that. I think that scrappiness didn't come from out of necessity. I think it came from her mother. And she had that metal, that steel in her that Helen had.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody, Christina likes to be nice to people, but if somebody rides roughshod over her, she's not afraid to stand up for herself.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen her do it. So, and it's highly unusual for anybody in the BLM to get to the position that Christina's at without having high school, without having college education. Bert, I didn't do Bert any favors. Bert had some abilities that the other kids really didn't have at his age. When he was a little kid, he was doing one-handed push-ups like his granddad, like Arrell. And he would come to the barbershop and spend a lot of time there, and he hated to be away from me. And Daryl, I said, that Bert's a good kid. Daryl said, yeah, but so is Richie. I said, yeah, but Bert's the best little kid that ever breathed there. It's the worst thing I could have done. It's followed him ever since. The other kids resented that, because I kind of made him like a favorite, when in reality I loved all of them pretty much the same. They all had different personalities, but I really loved all of them. So, and then Russell, we haven't touched on it, but Russell was adopted. And we really loved Russell, but he found out the wrong way that he was adopted, and he was really crushed. And so we had to work through that, and it affected his speech. He started stuttering, and so Bert had to go to a speech therapist too, because he spoke so quick nobody could understand him. And the speech therapist through the school district helped slow his speech patterns down. He still talks fast, but it slowed him down where you could understand him. The same therapist worked with Russ, and we had to go through what had happened before Russ started stuttering, and that therapist helped him. He doesn't have any sign of a stutter anymore. Russell doesn't. His speech patterns are really good. And now Russell has also been successful in everything he's done. Well, yeah, Russell, went to work for the school district, just like Bert did, I did. Russell was more successful there than Bert. And he liked it a lot, but I can't remember why he made the choice. Well, I wanted him to look into nuclear submarines in the Navy, because Russell had such good math skills. He had his math teacher looked me up and said, hey, this kid is really a whiz-bang at math, and he can do anything he wanted. The sky's the limit for him. Well, I knew that if he got into nuclear subs, that they had to have a lot of math, and a lot of the power companies hired these kids that come out of the nuclear programs from the Navy. But Russ didn't feel like he did well enough in that area, and so he joined the Air Force instead. And while he was in Texas in boot camp, he married somebody that we had never met, and he never even told us,
I remember.
you know. And then they both got transferred up to Alaska, and that marriage dissolved up there. It didn't work out too good. And then he met Caroline and dated her. And
I think they knew each other before in high school.
yes, they did. And anyway, he didn't marry Caroline right away. He actually was stationed in Korea. He went from Alaska to Panama City, Florida, to Korea, and then from Korea he got stationed in Nellis, and that was because Helen was so critically ill. So anyway, from there, then they transferred down to Tucson, Arizona, and from there to Virginia on the East Coast. When he retired from there, he applied and went to work for Raytheon back in Tucson. They liked Tucson a lot. So there's that. And hey, basically all of the kids had something in common. They all had a great work ethic, and they all taught themselves. They studied hard. Look at Russell. You know, Bert did the same thing. When Bert was working construction, he had never done layout work before. A friend of his showed him about layout work. Bert was working on a high rise on the strip. He was the last layout guy that they kept because he was good. If he made a mistake, he admitted it. You know, and they liked that. Bert also had a lot of athletic ability, and he was injured different than Rich. Rich was injured in a football playing. Bert was injured in a car wreck on Christmas Eve when I had told him not to go with his friend, and he chose to go anyway, and they wrecked Bobby Joe's pickup, and it ruined his knee. At that time, Bert had been Nevada State bicycle BMX champion, Nevada State champion 14-year-old, Nevada State champion 15-year-old, and he was in the lead on points for Nevada State champion 16-year-old when he was in that wreck and ruined his knee. The knee was never the same. He couldn't spin the pedals as good after that. And he had wanted to become a professional bicycle racer, and he had the ability. He also could have played football. He had a wonderful stride. It almost looked lazy, but he was breezing past people like they were standing still, and like he wasn't even trying. I think a good running coach could have helped him a lot. But basically, it was his desire to learn about the job, and on this job that he liked, that helped him on the strip. With Russell, the same thing. Russell he had a real talent for bicycle racing, but it hurt Russell if he beat somebody because they were disappointed. That made Russell feel bad, and Russ would cry. If Russ lost, he thought he was disappointing me, and so he would cry. So he was crying if he won and crying if he lost. And I said to him, "Hey, Russ, this is supposed to be fun. If you're not having any fun, you do not have to race. You can if you want, but you do not have to." And he quit racing. Well, when he went back, he wasn't as good. A lot of times with the talent, you use it or you lose it. And it's kind of like the Savior taught on the parable of the talents. If you bury it, you lose it. Okay, I had been dating actually more than anybody else, twin sisters. I don't know if you knew that.
You sure you want to put that on here? I'm just kidding.
Hey,
You were dating two twins. You were dating each of them, both of them.
Yes. And one of them liked me better than the other one, was kinder to me. But the one that wasn't as kind to me was a little more critical of me, I should say, because she was good to me. Was the one that I was the craziest about. But the other one was a real sweetheart. And the other one liked dancing with me, and so we went to a lot of a lot of dances together.
The one that wasn't nice?
When it was. In fact, one time I went to a dance with her down in Mesquite with Christina, and I think there was a woman that lived next door to Susan named Velma was down there. And so I would dance one dance with Christina. The twins' name was Christy. I would dance a dance with Christy once with Velma, and Velma had a friend named Ronnie. I would dance with one, and then I would dance with Christina, Christy, Velma, Ronnie. It was just a round robin. I never sat down all night long.
Your poor feet.
Oh, loved it. You know, my feet were great. I was learning how to dance, and
Hadn't really done it before then?
I wasn't much of a dancer. I only really knew how to do one dance, and that was kind of what we used to call the jitterbug. Now they call it the East Coast swing.
Mm-hmm.
East Coast swing is a fairly simple dance.
Mhm.
I don't do a lot of the fancy moves that a lot of people do, but I enjoy the East Coast swing a lot. It's a fun dance, and so I mean that was about the only one I can remember going to Mesquite, Nevada, and the one that was a little critical of me taught me the two-step right there. So I did the two-step, the East Coast swing. I didn't know how to waltz, and along comes Susan, and I'll tell you how we met in a minute. But she taught me the box step waltz, and then we started doing a little bit different than just a straight box. So technically, my waltz isn't probably that good, but fun-wise, it's really fun. So anyway, I'd been dating these twins, and the one said, you know, man, you need to be moving on. So she would tell me that, and then she would call me up and invite me to dinner. I didn't know whether I was going or coming half the time.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I was feeling kind of down, and I went over and talked to David Cottom's wife, Becky. She worked in a workout for women called Curves, and Susan was a customer, and Becky knew that Susan was single, and she asked Susan if she could give her number to me, and Susan finally said yes. She had refused several times. So she finally told her yes, and I called her. I got the number from Becky and called her and said, I got your number from Becky Cottom, and I wondered if you'd like to have lunch with me. Susan said, when would you like to do that? I said, well, I haven't had any lunch, and I thought maybe right now. Susan said, well, I don't give my address out to any strange men, but I'll meet you at Applebee's. So we met at Applebee's, and it was just, I can still remember what we had. We each had a salad, and don't know what, I think hers was the Oriental chicken salad, and mine was grilled blackened chicken. And we ate salad and actually shared a blondie dessert.
Mm-hmm.
The blondies were really good. Do you remember them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if they still do them or not. We decided that we would go out the next day and go. She wanted to go to Zion, and we were going to go out for lunch and then go to Zion. And so when I got there, she had cold cuts and sandwich material and everything, chips. She said, I thought we'd just eat here and then we would go to Zion. I said, well, you've been to Zion, haven't you? And she said, yes. And I said, well, have you ever been to Pine Valley Mountain? I mean, you changed the menu on me a little here. Now let's consider changing and going to Pine Valley Mountain instead of up to Zion. It's completely different. I think you'd really like it. So she agreed to that. On the way to Pine Valley Mountain, we stopped at Vail. Have you been to the pool at Vail? Where you go down a hill. Okay, well, there's a natural warm springs there, and it flows into the pool and out of the pool. They still chlorinate, but they don't do much because they have fresh water in, fresh water out.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't swim, but they were doing zip line, things like that, and we watched them do that for a little bit, and then we went on over to Pine Valley, and we went to the town in Pine Valley. I don't know if you know it or not, but the old church in Pine Valley, the town of Pine Valley, it was the oldest church still holding church in the system at that time. The oldest continual, meeting place. in the church, in the church system.
Mhm.
They did tours because the church was built by a shipbuilder. He didn't know how to build a church, but he knew how to build a ship. So he built an upside down ship, and it's kind of famous, and they do tours. And we got to look around the chapel a little bit, and then we went up into Pine Valley, the park, Pine Valley Mountain, and we just talked and what have you. And we decided that, you know, we hiked around a little bit, and they've got that there's a cold stream that runs down through there. And the park benches, the original ones they were still there, were put in by the CC boys, the Civilian Conservation Corps, back during the Depression. So the benches were still there from clear back then. The water system, the pump handle water system, and put in by the same people, and it was still there. So we went back and ate at a little Italian place that's no longer here in St. George. And it was about the time we finished, she said, well, you know, one day I'd like to go dancing with you. And I said, how about today? There's a band playing in Mesquite that I really like.
Mm.
And so we went to Mesquite and went dancing. And by the time I got her home, it was midnight. We had started our day at noon. So basically, I met her on a blind date. And she said the second date was the most fun date she'd ever had. It was very impromptu, and things just led from there. She was afraid to get married. Her first husband had left her. Second husband had died, almost killed her both times. It was very devastating to her. So it was kind of a hard courtship to get her to agree to marry me. Back in those days, we were doing a lot of hiking, and after we got married, we did a lot of horseback riding because she was into it too. So we did horseback riding, hiking, swimming, dancing. We were dancing at least twice a week, sometimes 3 and 4 times a week. And, you know, we did all of that kind of stuff. But eventually dancing took on too big of a life of its own. It became too important. And I had to scale back my feelings on that because I used to get mad if we couldn't go dancing. And I enjoy it a lot, but I think I'm happier now that we're not putting so much emphasis on it.
You kind of took a step back and just let it go. And
so now we dance maybe 2 or 3 times a month instead of 2 or 3 times a week. But we're still we dance when we can. And a lot of it depends on how she feels and how I feel. If she's sick, doesn't feel good, if she hurts, hey, okay, we'll catch you next week.
Kyle seemed to take a lot more to horseback riding stuff and made that a part of his life. He lived with you when he was in high school, so I felt like that was.
I think when he was a sophomore, he was going to go back to New York and live with your dad. And I said to him, probably your dad resents me for this, I don't know, but I said, you know, that's a long ways away from your mother. And think it over. And why don't you come and live with me instead of going to New York? And, you know, I'll give you a horse and a saddle, which I did. And he still got the saddle in his living room in Spanish form. Saddle actually turned out to be an antique, was worth about $1,500, and I didn't know it at the time. And I had it repaired, which diminished its value. So anyway, he went to New York for the summer, and when he came back, he said, I've decided to take you up on it. Well, we had to get him enrolled in school, which was difficult.
Right, I remember that.
And we got him enrolled. And, of course, Ellen was still alive and everything. So we had 2 horses on the place, and Kyle and I would ride every day. What I did, I taught him how to hook up a horse trailer, how to load the horses, get all of the gear ready. I taught him how to back a trailer, which is really critical. But I wanted him to know how to tow a horse trailer in case I got hurt. If I got hurt, I didn't want him to have to ride a horse all the way to town because we were trailering out of town to ride. So probably at age 14, I had him driving a truck, pulling a horse horse trailer and backing it up and hooking it up and everything, backing the trailer. And he would come home from school and go out and hook the horse trailer up and load the horses and saddle spurs, bridles, blankets, everything that we needed. And come in and say, okay, Grandpa, I've got them loaded up, let's go for a ride. And we would take off and leave Helen for an hour or two, and we would go for a ride. And she was sick then. But I enjoyed it a lot, and so did he. And he decided he wanted to ride bulls in a rodeo. So I hunted around and found a used set of bull riding spurs. They have a special spur, and the rowels are dull; they don't dig in, but they don't spin. You tighten them down with the screw, and they don't spin. It helps you to hold on to because their hide rolls out on a bull. It's hard to explain.
Kind of like a dog.
Yeah,
Separates from the.
So anyway, we went and got him entered in the rodeo, the whole works, and there was a world champion bronc rider family here by the last name of Wright, Wrighd. One of the brothers lived in Hurricane, and we were friends. He shot horses, and he put shoes on our horses sometimes. And he was at the rodeo grounds, and he knew Kyle, and he helped Kyle get on his bull. It took a lot longer to get him on the bull than it did for the bull to buck him off. He lasted one jump.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody can prepare you for how powerful a bull is until you experience that first jump.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, he didn't want to be a bull rider anymore. So, but he still rode. We rode horses all the time.
We drove your yellow 1979 Ford pickup. We drove it up into it was 2-wheel drive because we went up into the mountains to get hay, maybe, I don't know, but we had no business being up there because you didn't have a heater, and the truck broke down, I think, or we got stuck or something. Do you remember that?
No.
Oh man, that was an interesting day. I was really young. Me and Kyle both might have been there, but it was cold because that truck didn't have a heater.
Oh, I do remember that. I do remember it, yeah. We did everything trying to get heat in that thing. We put cardboard in front of the radiator, everything. We couldn't get it warm enough to get heat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what happened, it didn't have a thermostat to slow the water down.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we froze to death.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was cold.
Yeah.
I had forgotten that.
That's where you taught me about, I believe there was a massacre up there from...
The Mountain Meadow Massacre, yeah.
That's where I first ever learned about that.
Yeah. Yeah, we went over past Enterprise to work what they call Burrell Junction to get the hay.
Was that what we were doing, getting hay?
Yeah.
I was pretty young.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'd forgotten about that. Glad you remembered that. Do you remember me paying you guys a quarter to tell you that my pancakes were better than your mother's?
No, I don't remember the quarter, but I remember those pancakes were really good. Yeah. And I probably hurt her feelings, but those were really good pancakes. I remember David caught him, and I tried to compete one time so you could eat more, and I think I had 12 pancakes that day, and he didn't want to go anymore. We would do one and another, and he gave up.
Yeah. Well, David and I became friends in 1953 when I moved to Henderson. So, I mean, from 53 to 2022, we've been friends.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that's over 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we were both similar personalities, a little bit rebellious. And we were both married young. And, you know, he had a whole house full of kids. Anyway, he's been maybe the most loyal friend I've ever had in my life. And he had the COPD, which is what? Chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, I think. And then he got COVID and got COVID pneumonia. Just destroyed his lungs. He's on oxygen 24/7. He can't work like he used to. He feels useless because he helps so much. Yeah. So He's still alive. We're still friends. He still comes and helps me. Just that he can't be as physical as he used to be, but he can still figure things out.
I think one of my first pairs of glasses he used to do. Was he an optician? Was he a doctor? Or
No, he owned it. He owned a shop and actually had not an ophthalmologist, but an optician, I think, working for him. And then David ground he had all of the lens grinding equipment, everything. He made the lenses based on the doctor's prescription. So anyway, he had that in Cedar City.
And then we had that. You had that one horse, and Cottoman and I and you. I don't remember if Kyle was there. He might have been when we gilded that horse. And I told you this story that I plugged that horse's nose, not knowing they can't breathe through their mouths. I was really young.
Oh.
I told you this the other day. That when the horse freaked out on the table when it jumped up, because I was plugging his nose.
Oh.
I was playing. Because I think I saw you do it for a second just to try to wake him up, and then I kept doing it.
Oh.
I kept doing it, and for longer and longer and longer until he freaked out, and then I backed away because he wanted to get up. You know, you all could barely hold on to him. It seemed like, from what I remember.
Yeah, that was a mistake, gelding him.
Because he was
never the same after that. No, wait. Something happened. Maybe the drugs they used to put him to sleep, before they did it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Anyway, he was never the same after that.
Was that the horse that Rich bought for me? Your last horse?
No, that was a horse that Richie gave me. The one that he bought when I got out of him down in Henderson was a horse I called Bingo.
Mm-hmm.
His registered name was Leo Sure See, Leo Sure Bingo, or it was I don't know. Anyway,
Something crazy and ridiculous long.
So Bingo was part of his name. Bingo, Leo, something, I don't know, but and he was a good horse, but he would buck, and he didn't buck real hard. So I'll tell you this last thing: everything changes in life. We grow up thinking one thing only to find out that maybe we were wrong. And things look like they're this way, only in reality, they're this way. They're different. And we have to figure that out. We have to figure out what's right, what's wrong. I started out thinking the most important thing in the world, well-disciplined children, well-behaved children, only to find out that the most important thing was that I loved my children. So we have to be careful about forming absolutes early in life. We have to look at things, analyze things, have our instincts, listen to our gut. I don't know, Dana. I told you, you've got the questions. I'm not sure I've got the answers. But
no, I appreciate. I just wanted to get some of this recorded so I have it to look at. I like the stories, especially the stories of you getting hit with a tree. That was a good one. I'm glad you picked that one. I could get a million of those, and I love them. I love to listen to them over and over.
It's been a good life.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting to me. Sometimes I've always felt like I had an extremely blessed life, and I feel like you feel that way too. But somebody's been through what you have. You could have taken the other route. They could have thought and gotten bitter about some things. You've had some experiences.
The only thing I got bitter about is that after Helen died, I kind of lost my testimony. I lost everything, all my spirituality, and it was probably if Susan wouldn't have wanted to come back to church, I wouldn't have come back. She wanted to come back, and I had an experience with Helen. I used to race dirt bikes also, and I went out dirt bike riding with somebody one Sunday, and when I came home, Helen said, "That's it. I'm not going back to church." I said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Well, I'm tired of going alone. I'm tired of sitting on the back row by myself. I'm tired of not, having somebody to talk to at church. So I'm not going back." I said, okay, I'll go with you. I'll quit riding on Sunday and I'll go with you. Well, it was hard, Tanner. It was hard to go back. But I'd been there and I saw that how much difference it made when I did go back and how much difference it made to Helen. So when Susan told me that she wanted to become more active, go to church at least, I said to her, all right, Susan, I'll go back to church with you. I'll go to sacrament meeting with you, but do not think for 1 minute that I'm going to sit through all 3 of those meetings. She said, okay, let's go to sacrament meeting. So we went to sacrament meeting together for quite a while. And then we started going to Sunday school. And then we started going to all 3 meetings. Back then they had 3 meetings. In fact, I got to where I liked Sunday school so well, and they would cut out the little class that I was taking, Gospel Essentials, that I felt angry that they cut that class out because I liked it so much. Yeah.
I'm glad you threw that last part. Did you ever win a race dirt biking?
No, I came in second. And if I'd have known that I was ahead like that, I would have fought a little harder.
Mm-hmm.
But I had no idea where I was, and we dropped into a sand wash. There was a guy on a Husqvarna caught up to me, and so we dropped into the sand wash and we headed around the wash. Well, I knew the wash, and so I gave it everything we could. And I shifted up into 5th gear and drove away from him and come up out of the wash and across country, and I'm looking at the finish line down there. I thought I was 4th, 5th, 6th place. I was tired, and I did not want to get hurt for the trophy. But so I let him go. He came in first, and I came in second. So that was a different race also. I mean, it was really different. When we started out, it was raining. It snowed on us a little. We had some fog. We had everything. We had everything. It was in the winter. And so I was passionate about that too, but I had to give it up in the end. But I also became passionate later on in life about operating equipment and welding. But then later on, after I married Susan, I became passionate about the gospel and about working in the church. I became passionate about being an ordinance worker in the temple. It's the best job I ever had in the church. And one probably that I look forward to with more excitement day in and day out than any other thing that I've ever done in my life. So I look forward to the day when the temple's open here again, and I'll be able to become an ordinance worker again. And I hope and pray that they'll give me an opportunity to do that, because that's like nothing else that I've ever experienced in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was an ordinance worker doing ordinance work is when Susan and I were sealed in the St. George Temple, which is the same temple that Helen and I were sealed in. And I owe a lot to both of the women in my life. And it was about an 80-mile race.
Wow.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks.
Oh, thank you, Grandpa. I appreciate it. Love you.